Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, which Timberwolves players have had a better than expected season to this point, which have had a worse season, and which have played about as expected. I'm going to pick two for each category. We'll go through 6 players here today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And only 2 more days until the Wolves resume their schedule here post All-Star break. I want to talk about players that have played better than expected, the same, and worse than expected to this point in the season. Go into a little bit of detail on each player. So 6 total players will do kind of a little bit of a season review, again, relative to expectations coming into the season. And that'll be today's show. First of all, though, a big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. From Apple to Google to Spotify, Odyssey, beyond, whichever platform you like to listen to, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also find Locked On Wolves on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Roku app and the Amazon Fire TV app. That's along with all the other Minnesota podcasts. They're now available on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can, of course, also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. And at Beecken. And that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right. We are 74% of the way done with the schedule, to be precise. So, of course, the first and second half of the season related to the All-Star break is certainly a misnomer. The Wolves are 3/4 of the way through, 21 games to play. But it's still a good time for us to take a breath and sort of evaluate where everybody has or where everybody is on an individual player basis to this point in the season. Of course, some of the Wolves' best players, Karl-Anthony Towns has only played in, 21 games to this point. D'Angelo Russell's no longer on the team. So I'm not going to talk about either one of those guys here today. Anthony Edwards, we'll get to him. But what I want to do is start with 2 players that have performed better than expectations. What I believe their expectations were coming into the season, or I guess more accurately, better than I expected them to play. But overall, compared to their track record and what we may have expected them to do, then a couple of players who have played to expectations. Maybe a little bit of controversy there. So we'll do that next segment. And then we'll close with a couple of players that haven't played as well as the Timberwolves have needed them to over the course of the first 61 games of the year. All right. So who's played better? Well, one of them is a newcomer. One is an incumbent Timberwolf, somebody who's been around a couple of years. Kyle Anderson is the newcomer. He has played better than could have been expected when he signed this offseason in free agency with the Timberwolves. Remember, he spent the first 4 years of his career in San Antonio. Then he spent 4 seasons in Memphis, and he signed a 2-year, $18 million contract a few days into free agency this past summer. Kyle Anderson has been phenomenal for the Timberwolves to this point in the season. The biggest, most obvious place to start in terms of places where he's been better than expected is 3-point shooting. It's obviously an outlier compared to his career average. Remember, this is a guy who was below league average from 3. Actually, he's been below league average from 3 in 7 of his 8 seasons coming into this one. Last season, Kyle Anderson was just 33% from 3-point range. 2 seasons ago, he was 36% and shot a career high almost 4 per game in Memphis. But the 2 years prior to that, he was below. His first 2 years in Memphis, he was 26.5% in the 18-19 season, 28.2% the following year. So coming into this season, after the Timberwolves signed Kyle Anderson, his career 3-point shooting percentage is 33.4% on 1.3 threes per game. This season, He's shooting 42.6% from three on 1.43. So he's shooting slightly more threes volume-wise than his career average and almost 10 points better than his career shooting percentage from three coming into the season. It's raised his career three-point shooting percentage by a full percentage point because of how well he shot the ball to this point in the season. Now, a huge part of that is he's shooting by far more corner threes than from anywhere else on the floor, which isn't unusual. I mean, nearly half his threes last year were corner threes, but that percentage is actually up even more. He's shooting 45.5% of his three-point attempts are from the corners, and he's shooting 48.5% from the corners on three, which is the best mark he's had since back when he was in, I guess, his first year in Memphis. Actually, coming into the season, the last 2 years, he was about 42% from three. But over the course of his first 5 seasons in the league, he was almost a 70. Kyle Anderson has shot, this is his best career mark since his rookie season in terms of three-point percentage. He was 50% for three as a rookie. Again, very small volume. But for his career, including this season, he's a hair over 38% from the corner. So it's not like he's always been a corner shooting marksman. So that number is certainly better than expected. It's frankly, I've been kind of waiting, hoping it doesn't happen, but would have been surprised if the other shoe dropped at some point for Kyle Anderson to this point in the season. It just hasn't happened yet. He's still over 42% from three, which is the best mark on the team, and it's been sorely needed for a team. We talked about this on Tuesday's show that has been lacking three-point shooting. No Karl-Anthony Towns, he's been hurt. Now no D'Angelo Russell. They don't have anybody that's shooting the ball off the dribble that's really providing that element. And of course, teams don't respect Kyle Anderson in the same way they would Towns or D'Lo. But without him, you're talking Taurean Prince and Mike Conley in catch and shoot situations now over the past 3 games or whatever. But that's kind of it. Like, there's nobody else that really strikes fear into the hearts of defenses in terms of their three-point shooting. Kyle Anderson's also been key defensively. We all knew he was a good defender coming into the season. Chris Finch described him as a Swiss Army knife of types, of sorts, on both ends of the floor. But defensively, he's been extremely switchable. The Wolves have been able to give him almost any assignment, and he's at least held his own. Of course, he has extremely high defensive IQ, defensive acumen, but in general, the Wolves, I mean, the other night, I think it was the Dallas game. It was the Dallas game. He played center down the stretch. So the Wolves have played him at basically every position defensively. And he played almost a third of his minutes last year with Memphis at center. When Jaren Jackson Jr. was hurt, he did a lot of that. The Wolves had not done that much this year. They haven't needed to, right? They've had Rudy Gobert, of course, Towns when he was healthy. And then the backup bigs, Naz Reid, who we'll get to here in a minute, largely have played really well, right? So there hasn't been much need to go extremely small. So Kyle Anderson has played almost exclusively power forward this season. But his flexibility defensively has been really, really important for the Wolves. And he's been able to do a lot of different things, which has been helpful when Jaden McDaniels has been in foul trouble, of course, with Karl-Anthony Towns being hurt. Rudy Gobert, a couple of times here being played off the floor late. He's been in and out of the lineup. So Kyle Anderson's flexibility defensively has been huge. Then the last thing would be, and this might seem like a relatively minor thing, but there's been a couple games that Anderson's missed with back spasms, and this was kind of magnified. But Anderson's ability to negotiate a zone defense and to kind of be that center of the zone for the Wolves offense to, in some cases, pick apart an opposing zone defense, play right in the middle, throw the ball to Kyle Anderson. He's kind of floating around the nail at the center of the defense, and he can kind of pick his spots, right? He can shoot that little floater. There was a game here recently where he struggled with the floater and it hurt the Wolves. But for the most part, he's finding guys in the corner. He's, really kind of orchestrating from the center of the floor. The Wolves don't have anyone else that's capable of doing that. Maybe Karl-Anthony Towns, if he can slow down a half step, obviously when he's healthy, that's something he theoretically could do. But Kyle Anderson has been so good in that role when the Wolves have had to face zone defenses. And teams have done that earlier this year. They were doing it with frequency because the Wolves struggled so much with it. And Kyle Anderson's, adeptness at playing in the center of the zone, I think, has been a reason why we've seen a little bit less of that from opposing defenses here of late. Okay, one other player that is playing better than expected this season. We'll do that one next, and then we'll do the two that have been playing the same before we get to the players who I feel like have been worse than expected, have not played to their capabilities or what we thought we'd get out of them coming into the season. So we're going to do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at PrizePicks. On Friday night, Timberwolves and Hornets. I'm going to take Rudy Gobert over on rebounds. The Hornets don't have a ton of front court depth, and I think Gobert is going to be refreshed coming out of the break. He needed, a week, 8 days off. I think Gobert is going to have a big game. If you're not familiar with PrizePicks, let me tell you how it works. It's awesome. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less points or any other category, that's part of the fun here is there's so many to pick from. Whether they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projection. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. Of course, that includes the NBA. Of course, NHL, college basketball ongoing. We're almost to baseball season. You pick the sport, they've got it. You can make your entry in less than 60 seconds. It really is that easy. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. All right, Kyle Anderson has played better than expected this season. Another player on the Wolves roster that has been better than expected is Jaden McDaniels. I was relatively, I don't want to say hard on Jaden McDaniels the last couple of years, but I thought his defensive impact was overstated a little bit. The eye test was maybe a bit misleading. McDaniels wasn't always truly getting the tougher assignments, and when he did, he was in foul trouble too much. I just think that while the physical tools were there, he wasn't quite playing up to snuff defensively the last 2 seasons, his rookie year, of course, and then last year. This season, though, he is legit turned into one of the league's best perimeter defenders. There's no question about it. No question about it. And the eye test confirms that he's getting tough assignments. We talked about this on a previous show. The usage tiers that he's defending, he's mostly defending one and the top 2 usage tiers in the league, meaning guys that are higher volume scorers that have the ball in their hands more often. McDaniels is guarding them with frequency this season. And he's seen his block rate maintained at 2.9%. His steal rate is up. The Timberwolves defense in general is better. And certainly having somebody like Rudy Gobert roaming the baseline, roaming the back line of the defense gives you some more confidence, allows you to sell out a little bit more. McDaniel's also fouling a little bit less. He's still fouling too much, but his foul rate is down. His foul rates per 36 minutes is down. Yes, per game he's fouling more, but he's also playing nearly 5 minutes more per game this season as a full-time starter. So it's understandable. So yeah, he's fouling a little too much still, but it's certainly improved, especially of late. And across the board, the defensive metrics agree. Last season, Jaden McDaniels was, here, I had it here a second ago. It was like 20-something in terms of, 27th in defensive real plus minus at ESPN, which is my favorite individual player metric. He was 27th last season among power forwards defensively. This season, ESPN real plus minus has him 9th, and the number is much better. I didn't give the number. It was a negative number actually last year, defensive real plus minus. This year, he's a plus 3.29, which is ahead of Patrick Williams at the Bulls, ahead of Aaron Gordon, a highly thought of perimeter defender or all-around defender with the Denver Nuggets, ahead of Pascal Siakam. And, in the neighborhood of the likes of PJ Washington, Tobias Harris, Anthony Davis. So a strong defensive performance. The metrics all agree on Jaden McDaniels to this point in the season. He's also improved offensively. The assist rate is way up to 9% coming into the season. His career assist rate over the first 2 years in the league was just 6.2%. He's up to 9% this year. The turnover rate's up slightly, but it's because he has the ball in his hands more often and he's being forced to make decisions. And yet he's still shooting his best percentage for 3 of his career, 38.5%. He was a little over 36% as a rookie, but dipped under 32% last year, back up to 38.5%. His 3-point rate is down a little too, but his free throw rate is up. We spent some more time on this a couple weeks ago, but he's putting the ball on the floor more often, looking for that second read, right? As a rookie, he was either quickly shooting a three or he was kind of one dribble, bad, long two pull up, right? We're seeing a lot less of that. McDaniels, the game has, it's that old cliche, the game slowed down for Jaden McDaniels. He's making that extra pass. He's dribbling and passing the ball instead of just kind of deer in the headlights. I'm going to do one of three things. I'm either going to pass it immediately, shoot it immediately, or dribble and do a bad shot. He's getting to the rim more often. The free throw rate is up. The assist rate is up. The turnover rate is up. All indicators of him with the ball in his hands more often and making decisions. So yeah, I mean, I think he could shoot a few more threes because he's shooting it so well this year, but I think he's picked his spots really well. And he's also shown some additional pieces to his game offensively. And trading D'Angelo Russell it means we're only going to see more of that. We're going to see more Jaden McDaniels offensively. And I think the Timberwolves coaching staff is ready for that as well. All right, let's move on to a couple of players who have played to expectations to this point of the season. Perhaps controversial. Let's start with Naz Reid. Naz Reid, we've been talking about him as though he's kind of the second coming, at least in terms of maybe overachieving centers who might deserve a bigger role. And his days in Minnesota might be numbered just simply because he's a free agent this offseason. Reportedly, half the teams in the league, it sounded like nearly half the teams in the league were interested in Naz Reid on some level, checked in with the Timberwolves on him because he is a free agent this summer. So teams thought maybe the Wolves would trade him. Of course, the Wolves need not just the insurance, they just straight up need the depth because Karl-Anthony Towns probably won't be back until mid-March, if not late March, based on recent reporting. So having Naz is super important. And Naz has had stretches where he's been phenomenal for the Timberwolves this year. There's no question about it. But he's had stretches that haven't been as impressive. And all things considered, the net result has been basically what we've seen from Naz thus far in his career. I don't know that what he's doing is all that different. The opportunity is maybe just a little bit greater. To this point in the season, he's averaged certainly more minutes per game than last year, a couple of minutes more per game, but actually less than we saw 2 years ago from him. So the per game numbers are down a little. The rebounds are up slightly, but the points, 1 point less per game than he was a couple years ago. He's 2.5 points less, or 2.2 points worse from 3-point range than he was just 2 seasons ago. It's just easy to forget, and as a 21-year-old, he had started to remake his body 2 years ago, but he still didn't quite look as svelte as he does now. But you could argue 2 years ago, he was every bit as effective as he is now. The biggest change for him is the rebound rate is up. He's up to 15% total rebound rate. The defensive rebound rate is over 22%, which is 4 points better than last year and over 2 points better than his previous career best defensive rebound rate. That is the top thing he's improved this year. And something I would say griped about the last couple of seasons is like, hey, if you're going to be a backup center, you have to be able to rebound your position. Naz has never done that. This season he has. I think he's clearly improved on the defensive glass. The instincts somehow look better. I think he's just grown to really kind of understand how to rebound at the NBA level, even while he's lost some weight and been a little bit more mobile defensively and offensively. I think he's rebounding the ball better. The assist rate is up slightly. The steal rate is holding steady. The block rate's down a little, but that's fine. You look down the list of his rate-based stats, of his counting stats. They're all very similar. A lot of cases, they're slightly better than last year, but they're basically the same as they were 2 years ago. The light is being shined on him a bit more brightly because of the extended absence for Towns and also the need for him to play well with Rudy Gobert in the fold as well. He's played a little more at power forward than we've seen the last couple of seasons out of necessity. But, there's some things about Naz's game that have been a little disappointing. Like the 3-point shot, it's got to be a little bit better. The defense has been better than we've seen, but it's still spotty, right? He's a good help side defender in terms of blocking shots. He's relatively switchable, certainly more versatile defensively than he was a couple of years ago, but he's not consistent enough playing straight up defense. I think he's a player that can get overextended. I don't think he's good enough defensively to deal with some of the foul trouble he gets himself into. It's not like it's Jaden McDaniels where you live with the 4 fouls a game. It's, you're a backup center that's just an okay defender at best. You can't turn the ball over, you can't commit as many fouls as you do. And that continues to be a huge bugaboo for Naz. I mentioned turnovers as a mistake a minute ago, or mistakenly mentioned turnovers when I was talking about fouls, but turnover rate is still, it's over 13% the last couple of years for Naz. Again, for a backup center, that's too high. So all that to say, going back to my original point, Naz has been good this year. It's just, uh, it's a bit of a misconception to think he's played somehow way better than he has the last couple of seasons. A lot of what he's done is very similar to what he's done in the past couple of years, even if it's slightly better than what he was overall last year, especially of late. Naz just hasn't been quite as impressive as I think maybe the perception has been, to this point in the season. Okay, one more player that I think has basically had a similar season to last year, and then a couple of players we'll touch on briefly who have been disappointing to this point in the 2022-23 season. So we're going to do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you have to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays. I'm lumping Valentine's Day in with the rest of the holidays because at least at my house, we've got tons of Valentine's candy still. We're just, a little over a week away from Valentine's, or a week past Valentine's. My goal has still been to eat a little healthier this year. I've done okay with it, but if you're like me and you want to eat healthier and you don't want to compromise taste, then I've got just the thing for you. You have to try Built. With Built Bars, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious you won't think that they're good for you. They're perfect for the New Year's resolution that you're hopefully still on almost 2 months into the new year. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I don't know how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they're actually healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you also don't need to wait around to get a box. For years on Locked On Wolves, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. You could still do that, definitely. But you can also get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, just run in and grab a 13-bar box with their hit flavors brownie batter and churro. Again, you can also still go to Built.com to get your Built Bars. But just make sure, no matter how you get them, first of all, that you get them, and then second of all, that you thank me later. All right, so far on the show, we've covered Kyle Anderson and Jaden McDaniels both playing above expectations to this point in the season. I've covered Naz Reid playing basically the same. The other player I think that has had a really similar season, has kind of held steady, is actually Anthony Edwards. Now, to be clear, he's made a bit of a move more recently. Obviously, he made the All-Star game as an injury replacement, and I do think he's played great since mid-December. But he was, I say this with context mattering, quote unquote, so bad early this season that overall to this point, it's hard to see where exactly that level is for his play. And when I say, in quotes, so bad, I mean like compared to expectations, right? He wasn't actually a bad player in October, November, but he had stretches where it was pretty tough. And, there was a little bit of, is he in shape? Is he playing himself into shape? Is he getting used to playing with Rudy? And then Karl-Anthony Towns gets hurt. So there's a lot of factors to consider. But remember last year, it felt like Ant hadn't really made much of a jump early in the season. And then in like late February through the playoffs in late April, Anthony Edwards was one of the best players in the league. He was phenomenal at the end of last season. And then this season, it's like, boom, his play almost fell off a cliff. It was not the same Ant we saw against Memphis in the playoffs. It was not the same Ant we saw all of last March. And it took him until really mid-December, like we've kind of arbitrarily drawn this. I think it was the Chicago Bulls game where they scored 1 million points mid-December. Since that point, he's been fantastic. And a couple blips on the radar, but in general, one of the best players in the league over the past 2-ish months. And that's 100% true. So the overall, like the grand sum of what he's done through 61 games is pretty similar to what we saw last season. There's no like 1 or 2 categories where he's, demonstrably better this season, right? The 3-point shooting has maintained a little bit better. It was even better early in the season. He's assisting more, which is great. He's simply got the ball in his hands more often, which is why the usage rate, the assist rate, and the turnover rate are all up. So the Wolves are initiating more with Anthony Edwards. He is getting to the line more often and shooting less threes, and I think that's fine because, again, the 3-point percentage is up, and he's getting to the line more often. The free throw percentage has held steady. So all of that is good. I think the offensive game is a little bit more efficient. And that to me is really encouraging because he's figuring out that shot mix and really understanding that he is a true 3-level scorer. Now, defensively, it's been less consistent than I think what we saw for most of last year. Off ball has not really improved. The steal rate's up slightly. I don't know that that is really a reflection of how, the off ball defense necessarily to this point. The on-ball defense, spottier than I'd like it to be. I mean, there have been games where he just hasn't been engaged defensively, and it's pretty frustrating. Now, I think he's been a better one-on-one defender still this season than what we saw from, say, Andrew Wiggins for most of his career in Minnesota. I know he's been really good in Golden State the last couple of years defensively, but Andrew Wiggins in Minnesota was really spotty defensively, and I think Ant overall has been better than, say, that. When he's on, he's a legit all-defense caliber perimeter defender. It's just we don't see that consistency. We don't see him get into a stance frequently. We see him still lose track off ball. Those things, that consistency level isn't there. But the offense is marginally better. If you take the totality of the first 61 games, it's marginally better. If the defense could just meet that level, and if he plays like he has the last, call it 8 weeks through the rest of the season, then he's not in the same category. Then he is making that, close to a Ja Morant-like third-year jump. So I want to be very clear. There's plenty of hope for this to turn into the first category that I discussed today, which is players who have been better this season. That's 100% still on the table for Anthony Edwards. All right, a couple players who actually have been worse this season than expected. One is, unfortunately, Jordan McLaughlin. Now, to be clear, it's a really small sample size. He's only played 24 games. He was so good early this season, but since he's come back from the calf and also kind of like right around when he got hurt, it's really not fair, but I had to pick a couple for this category. McLaughlin struggled with some things he's generally really good at, mostly turnover rate. Defensively, I think he's been a little bit spottier this year, but turnover rate is way up for Jordan McLaughlin. It's almost 3 points above his career average coming into the season. And across the board, all of his numbers are a little bit low, or a little bit down, I should say. Turnover rate's the biggest thing. 3-point shooting percentage would be the other thing. Weirdly, his 3-point shooting percentage has gotten worse each year in the league. He was 38% as a rookie, 36% his second year, 32% last year. He's 22% this season. And his 3-point rate is actually at a career high. More than half of his shot attempts have come on threes. So there's a lot going on there, right? Early season stuff, bounced back, played 2 or 3 games with the calf injury. After the initial calf injury, sat for a couple months. Now he's back again, has really struggled since he came back on a minutes restriction. The Wolves do need him, though. So I wanted to point it out because they didn't pick up Patrick Beverley, right? They didn't buy out anybody and pick up Patrick Beverley in the buyout market. Pat Bev's a Chicago Bull. They need Jordan McLaughlin for the stretch run of the regular season to cement the playoff spot, hopefully get out of the play-in, and then in the playoffs. They need Jordan McLaughlin. D'Angelo Russell's gone. Mike Conley's only going to play so many minutes. You don't want Austin Rivers running point guard in the playoffs. You need Jordan McLaughlin to straighten things out. And I'm confident he will. That's kind of his whole thing, right? Is being a steady hand to kind of right the ship. It just hasn't quite happened yet this season. So he falls into the category of, to this point, a little bit of a disappointing season. The other one would be Jaylen Nowell. I think he's the most obvious one. This came up the other day. I think it was Monday's show, but Jaylen Nowell is a player that I've advocated for more playing time for years. And Chris Finch was too. And it's part of the reason they were comfortable dealing Malik Beasley and Patrick Beverley was, hey, Jaylen Nowell's ready for the next step, right? He shot 39% on threes last season. He had a free throw rate that had spiked. He was shooting 39% of his shots from three, but getting to the line a bunch too. The assist rate was really good last year. He was actually the Wolves' best two-man combination was Nowell and Karl-Anthony Towns. Everything indicated that Jaylen Nowell was going to be provide big-time punch off the bench for the Timberwolves this season. That has not happened. He's not shot the ball well. He's not gotten to the line often. He's turned it over a ton. His turnover rate is almost 9% with a usage rate of 25%. And the assist rate has dropped back well below, almost 5 points from where it was last year. Over 20% last season was the assist rate. He's 15.5% right now. And again, a plummeting free throw rate is still bad defensively. I mean, actively bad, like worse than last year. I would argue that he's been a worse perimeter defender than we saw from D'Angelo Russell for most of D'Lo's time in Minnesota. So Just a massively disappointing year for Noel. It really does feel like, and he's a free agent this offseason. I still think he's a viable NBA rotation player. I think he's best cast as a sixth man. But I think it's a change of scenery that is what Noel needs. I think his skill set is still really kind of tantalizing. I've always kind of said that I think he's a mix between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards in terms of his skill set. And I don't want to get too much into that now, but I've said it several times on the show. It just hasn't clicked this year for him. He's shooting under 30% from three. He was 33% 2 years ago, 39% last year. He's 29.6% for three this season, with that, that rate kind of holding pretty steady with where it was last year. So he's got to get into the paint more often. He's just got to make open threes. And similar to Jordan McLaughlin, the Wolves need Jaylen Noel down the stretch this season if they're going to make the playoffs, get out of the play-in, or at the very least cement a play-in spot and win in the play-in. They need Jaylen Noel to give them something off the bench because he is hurting them right now most of the time. He's had he had those couple really impressive plus-minus games, a couple really efficient shooting nights just a couple weeks before the break. But the consistency has not been there. So they need him to turn that around here in short order. And Noel has to bounce back in a really big way. All right. That's all we have for you today. On Thursday's show, I want to do some second half of the season predictions, looking ahead at individual players and also team predictions. And then Friday, we'll do probably a little more of that. Plus, we'll preview Timberwolves Hornets. That's Friday night's Wolves home game as they kick off the unofficial second half of the season and really the last quarter of their regular season schedule. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make your second listen the game-to-game NBA podcast every moment, every performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.